Hello, hello. Happy to be here. I'm Paweł Łaguna. I'm the managing director at Swissroc Building Intelligence. And basically I'm here to reflect on the implementation of common data environment for the project or for the company whenever the company is managing the whole portfolio through the common data environment. So I'm extremely happy that Carolina has brought the subject, brought the topic of common data environment and described a little bit how the system should work. So before I start though, I would just like to tell you about my first experience with the common data environment platform. So it was about 15 years ago. After a few years working for architectural companies, I started my work for a general contractor. And I was extremely lucky because I was able to join a team building a high-rise, very complex apartment building, one of the most prestigious apartment buildings in Central Europe. And you can only imagine, how much documentation, how much coordination, how much of information was produced on such a project. I won't be telling which one of those it is, but it was complex, right? So you can imagine also that some very fine people, actually one of the greatest I've ever met, worked in the documents control department, and they were constantly overwhelmed with all of the documentation coming back and forth between all the stakeholders, right? So one day, there is this guy coming for a 30-minute session and saying that he's got this revolutionary tool for better information management. So after 30 minutes of this presentation, we were supposed to work on this from the next week, right? So I guess you can imagine what happened. I logged in twice, and I was the geeky one, right? So after 3 months, the platform was totally empty, and it was decommissioned. Only 2 years later have I understood that this was our goal to bring the common data environment for the project, and since then I was extremely lucky to work on multiple projects where common data was implemented, and as BIM manager and later as CTO, I was actually responsible for configuring and implementing those tools on the project. So it's not a divine truth, what I will be saying right now. It's just some lessons learned, some practical points that I found out sometimes the hard way, that are needed for a proper implementation. So let's start with the challenges. Let's start with the problems. I know nobody likes this word, but let's start with challenges. So first, there is usually no vision. I mean, we introduce BIM, we introduce common data environment, but many of the companies, their level of digital maturity is quite low. So there are no actual goals or no actual expected benefits. And when I mean benefits, I mean measurable benefits from introducing those platforms. And this is a problem. Secondly, no standard. Naming files, final is not a standard. So there are multiple, naming convention is just one thing, but processes, procedures, there are none whatsoever. No skills, and I don't mean that people are dumb. No, they are fantastic people in the construction industry, extremely smart people. But you cannot expect an extremely smart construction manager to understand common data environment. And so there are no instructions which will guide them through the process and will tell them what to do on a daily basis. And so there is no configuration because many companies are bringing common data environment as an out-of-the-shelf solution, which is a problem as well because a template that you bring on a project will never work for you. It will maybe work for someone, but not for you. So how to actually get to a point where we have an implemented common data environment? I would start with processes. And I love what Karina also said, that the processes should be the thing which is driving the platform, not the other way around. So we need to understand very precisely what the company does, who does that the company does, how they do it, through what kinds of tools, through what kinds of programs, through what kinds of digital formats, and so on and so forth, when they do it, and what is the expected result. How do we take, for example, a simple request for information from a situation where we issue the request for information to the architect? What happens next? Does he send it to his consultant? Does he send it to his subcontractors, And what happens when he gets all of those informations back? So My idea for this is to map the processes in a very precise way. For example, using BPMN, you need to have stakeholders at the same table. You need to have decision makers, obviously, but you need to have middle range managers, you need to have construction workers, because the processes that are in the heads of the directors are rarely the processes which are actually happening on the site or in the design office. So you need to have this feedback. And when you map those processes, you need to really talk to people, because depending on the project, these processes can vary. So you've got some process maps. Here is one. So what next, right? So you know what is being done, who's going to do it. It's good if you know how much time does it take to do a certain thing, because it might be contractual, but it might be not. And what then, right? So you need to discuss it first. Then you need to discuss access matrix. You need to discuss what privileges and what restrictions do people have to certain information containers and certain information on the project. So what I would say first, less is more. The fewer security groups you have on the project, the better, because the reconfiguration can be a pain, right? So less is more. Access groups or security groups, however you call them, so actually how the people are accessing and which information do they have access to, doesn't need to reflect the job title in their email. You can have a director and you can have a simple construction worker, but actually the information that they need is maybe pretty much the same. So don't use job titles as access matrix groups, right? And also very, very important, because I've been privy to some confidential data, some strategic projects. So separating confidential data to make it really, really hard for the people to, bring the confidential data to a wider audience is very, very important. So on the other hand, whenever the data is not confidential, I would say it doesn't matter if person doesn't need or doesn't look at this data. I would rather be on the side of transparency. So if the person is not forbidden to see certain parts of the common data environment, they probably should have access to it. Because, whenever something changes, and it happens a lot, reconfiguration is a pain again, right? So next, what do we, so this is one of the matrices we've done on one of the projects. As you can see in the columns, you've got subsequent groups. I can only say that this is a complex and very, let's say, wide implementation. That's why those security groups are numerous. But on the majority of the projects, I would say less is more, right? Next, what we need to think about is information container structure. First, what I would like to say is the structure should be uniform between the projects. Because if you are handling a bigger portfolio, it's not a one project implementation, the container structure should be the same, so that the managers, the people who are working on the common data environment, are used to certain structures, certain statuses, certain naming conventions, and so on and so forth. So uniform structure. Then it is good to distribute all the changes automatically. If the platforms allows it, it's good to distribute changes to certain information containers to the people who are really interested in, because you cannot count on people willingly logging into your platforms every day. They got so many things to do that they just won't do it, right? And metadata versus folders. I know that there are different platforms out there, but many of them are moving towards metadata formatting instead of folders. It's not that I hate folders, I love them, as long as they are mine. So the idea to enable people who are used to folders using metadata is preparing dedicated, predefined filters. So if you have a platform where you can actually filter through metadata, and by metadata I mean a status, for example, it's approved. I'm not interested in, documents in verification. Because I'm on the construction side, I'm only interested in those which have been approved for the construction, right? So my information manager should prepare a filter which filters out only those documents which have been approved for construction, right? And this is my filter, but it's not a folder, right? So again, information container structure as simple as possible. And if you go into folders, then keep the folders as simple as possible, because nowadays, really, you have got so many ways to filter out data instead of going 4 levels to actually get your file, right? So yeah, again, the folder structure in the background. Information container naming. So I said already that final might not be the way to do it. However, one naming convention for all the documents on the project might also not be the best way to do it. And many common data environment platforms enable you to give different types of naming convention to different types of documents. Because, for example, maybe visualization or maybe apartment catalog doesn't need to be named the same way as a building permit or as a floor plan, right? So think about it. Maybe on your project, one will be enough, but it's a good way to start just thinking what kinds of documents we have and what kinds of naming conventions can we introduce. Control, it's good if the CDE controls the naming convention so that you cannot upload this final .dwg, but you need to actually precisely limit and say how the file should look like. And easy filtering, as I've mentioned already, it's good to be able to filter by the naming convention. So, implementation, is it easy? No, it's not. First of all, it takes a lot of time, and you need to plan for it. People, and I found this problem on a lot of projects. We start the project, we start actually building something on Monday. The common data environment access is being given on Tuesday, right? Why nobody is working on common data environment? Because, nobody has been trained. The configuration doesn't go in line with the actual needs of the corporation and so on and so forth. So, onboard a decision maker. This is very important. If the common data environment doesn't have the support from the higher ups, it just won't happen. IKEA guides. Of course, the tutorials delivered by the platform developers are great. But if you have 10 terabytes of materials, you probably won't have time to go through it all, right? So IKEA guides, if you are a project manager, you will probably need to have 2-3 automated processes that you need to follow. So I will write you a simple guide how to upload a document, how to verify a document, or how to download it. That's it. You don't need to be a project administrator. Hands-on training, always hands-on training. The things I've seen during the trainings, where people said, yeah, I've got 10 years experience with common data environment, and then they have problem with logging in. Again, it's not that they are dumb, they are just used to something totally different. So only hands-on approach gives you this additional edge over the competition who are also bringing common data environment on their projects. And last but not least, contract. We are all great people, and people working in the construction industry are great, as I said many times. But if they don't have incentives on using your tools, they probably won't use them at all, because they've got 1,000 drawings to deliver by next Friday, or they've got 100 tons of concrete to be poured now. So logging into common data environment at this point of the day is probably at the end of their list. However, if there is a contractual agreement which says nothing that is being sent and not present on the common data environment exists for us as a contractual item, then people start thinking, because maybe I won't get paid at the end of the week if the drawings are not sent to the common data environment platform. So, simple process. It's easy to write it down. It's extremely hard to follow, but I like that it's easy to write it down, so I wrote it down. Audit of the company or of the project. It's a crucial step. Then workshops with as many stakeholders as you can get around the table. Then configuration, the actual configuration for the trainings, because the project that you'll be training on should look exactly as the project you will be working on after the training. Pilot projects and, tech support all the time, and then we go around and round again for some additional feedback and for some reconfiguration. Thank you very much. I made it, although I was quite doubtful if I will. Thank you very much, and you can grab me and talk just after. Thank you very much. Cheers.